Hello everyone, my name is Roman Jacek and I'm a .NET developer and a Microsoft MVP. And I've been focusing on .NET MAUI development in the past couple of years. So I would like to take part in the MAUIUIJULY initiative and talk a bit about form factor customization and how you can create your applications differently for desktop and for mobile apps. So let's dive into it. As part of MAUI, what we got in terms of development are new form factors. So before this, we had Xamarin and we had mostly focus on Android and iOS. With MAUI, we also got macOS and Windows in the package. Before that, macOS and Windows, there were some implementations provided by the community, but nowadays it's fully supported. So the landscape quite changed for the developers and we can create desktop applications as well. The applications run differently on every single platform, so we need to keep this in mind and deal with this when we are developing. On Android, the C# code gets compiled into intermediate language and it gets JIT compiled on the fly. So this is the way it runs on Android. On the other hand, on iOS, it runs the way that it gets precompiled into native ARM binaries, and that gets executed directly on the device. So no JIT compilation on the fly. Each of these approaches has its pros and cons. I just wanted to state this so that we count that every platform is a bit different. On macOS and Windows, this is the new environments that we get with MAUI. On macOS, it's using macOS Catalyst, which is a technology for iOS developers to bring their apps to Mac. And this gives us the ability to create our applications once and deploy them on iOS and macOS. What this also brings is that we can leverage the technologies that are special for macOS and the APIs that we don't have on iOS. For example, support for file system access and some low-level APIs, which are not available on iOS, however, are supported on macOS. On Windows, MAUI uses Windows UI free or WinUI free library, or the other name is Windows App SDK. So you can meet these terms in terms of MAUI development for Windows. This is a platform for developing applications for Windows. It's very new. It got launched with launch of MAUI, basically. And MAUI uses this as their underlying layer for development on Windows. You can create this way native Windows apps which run on Windows and aren't sandboxed or aren't in any way limited, but you use this as the underlying technology. Well, enough of that. Let's head into the main topic for today, which is how to deal with UIs. Because the desktop development has its own quirks and has its own limitations and its own differences to the mobile development. When we take a look at desktop development, we have access to new form factors, we have access to new scenarios when dealing with MAUI. Suddenly, the screen is not vertical but horizontal, most of the cases on desktop. And we have access to low-level APIs, which is nice. But what drives us in terms of UI is that we have access to stuff like mouse and keyboard. And different pointers in terms of development of the applications, smaller targets that we can hit with mouses rather than with fingers. And we have stuff like context menus, we have stuff like right clicks and so on. This was supported even before at some level because there are mouses and keyboards that you can connect to your Android device or iPads or stuff on iOS. However, this was not that prevalent in the development cycle, and in MAUI there are multiple things introduced that help us with this kind of development. So let's see what we can do as developers if we want to target our application for both mobile and desktop. First off, let's start with the very basic stuff, and we will delve deeper into the application as we move forward. At first, you will probably meet these two terms, on platform and on idiom. If we are talking about customization of the UI, this is very useful when we are dealing with XAML customizations. So if we want to do something differently in a page, we can use on platform or on idiom to change the behavior and change the structure of the page for different platforms or for different form factors or different types of devices. So on idiom means for desktop or phone or tablet, on platform means for Android or iOS or Windows. This way we can differentiate the UI and leverage that we can know what device type we are running on. Let's see this in code. I have a sample application here, so let's take a look at it at first. And the application is a simple cookbook with a few recipes, few ingredients in there, and we can take a look at how we can customize this for desktop and for mobile. So on the left hand, I hope it's on the left at the video, there is the desktop version, and on the right there is the mobile version, which is running on a phone. So let's see. In terms of the navigation, we have shell used here, which on mobile is designed in the way to use tabs as the top level navigation. Well, there is a flyout about this as well. But in terms of the main screens that we'll be dealing with, there are two tabs for recipes and for ingredients. On desktop, there is the menu bar used, which is very useful for desktop development, and this is some new control that got introduced with the launch of MAUI. So we have recipes and ingredients as separate screens in here. I know that the navigation between these two could look a bit differently, but I wanted to showcase the usage of a different shell and different kind of navigation. Inside of the pages, we can already see some differences. So this is the page for ingredients on desktop and on mobile, where we can see that the ingredients are displayed in a different way. On desktop, there is a horizontal sliding collection. On phone, there is a vertical sliding collection. The items themselves look different, and if we go deeper, if we go into the screens, we can see that there are multiple different ways of displaying the data with some buttons moved around, some controls placed differently, and so on. This will be even more visible if we go into the recipes. So if we open up a recipe, then we can see that there are different layouts and the data are shown in a different way so that we can leverage each platform and make the most of it. Right, so let's take a look at what's used in the code. First off, the minor differences. So we will take a look at the ingredients page, and we can open up the application. So let's see the view that is used for the ingredients, and it's called the ingredient list view, which is quite a usual name. In here, we can see that this is one page that is shared between desktop and phone, and there are some customizations inside of the page. If we scroll to the collection, which is the main part of this page, so here is the collection view, we can see that we are using the onIdiom command in here, and we are changing the layout and changing the item template for phone and desktop, and there is the default template used as the desktop template. So if we are running this application on something different, if we are running it on a watch or so, then we would get the desktop UI, which is not ideal, but this application deals with phone and desktop as the two main layouts. Why is this in here? It's because Windows on some devices reports that it's not a desktop, but it's a tablet device, especially if it has touch support. So it can be a laptop, but it still reports as a tablet. So if you want to deal with Windows and touch-based computers, you need to specify also the tablet or just fall back to the default. Okay, so what else? We are defining the layouts, so we can take a look up here. And for phone, we are defining that the layout used is a linear layout which has vertical orientation. If we take a look at this, then we can see that the items are underneath each other and they are in the vertical order. On desktop, we are using a horizontal layout, and we are using something called grid items layout, which will create a grid of items. We can specify how many items there should be underneath each other. So there is a span of 2. We could specify that there should be 3 items, and it will scroll horizontally. Okay, so these are the layouts. Then there are the templates. So we have a template for phone, which shows us the data, which it uses an image and some labels and so on. There is also a placeholder for missing images. I don't think I have a missing image in here, but there is one in recipes. We can take a look at how this is displayed. It uses also an image placeholder. So we can see that it looks a bit differently, not that much, but the size of the image is a bit different. In ingredients, it would be shown in this way. Okay, so this is the easiest customization. You can just create a condition inside of the XAML page, and if the page itself is the same, so we don't need to create different pages, we don't need to specify too many conditions in there, we just swap a few things, then we can just use the on idiom inside of the XAML, and basically this is done. Moreover, this is used for the buttons. So there is the button for creating a new ingredient, which on a desktop is displayed in this way, in the upper right corner, and it has some text. On a phone, we have in the bottom right corner, and there is just a plus in there, and it floats over the rest of the screen or the rest of the items. So these are 2 different buttons, and they are only controlled by the isVisible property. So one is displayed on phone and one is displayed on desktop. Okay, so this is the easiest one if you want to just make some conditions in your XAML. Let's take a look a bit further. If we have very different pages, if we have a very different layout and the buttons and labels are placed in different places on the pages, depending on if we are creating a desktop page or if we are creating a mobile page, then we can replace the files themselves. One thing that we can do is replace the whole shell. So we'll take a look at that. And we can also replace individual files for individual views. So what we want to do, or what we can do, is to leverage deviceinfo.idiom for conditions in C# code And by using this, we can swap the pages or shells or do any kind of conditions on the runtime. Let's take a look at this. So if we take a look at the absaml.cs file, we can see that here we have a condition where we decide if the idiom is phone, we will set the main page to use the app shell phone. So we have different shells defined in here, and here is the shell which is the top level navigation of the application, and this one is defined for the phone form factor, and this one is defined for desktop. So we can see in the phone that we have the tabs, as I mentioned before, which shows us the tabs at the bottom, and the pages inside are the same, so we are using the ingredient list view and the recipe list view inside of the views, or inside of the tabs. On desktop, we have the menu bar, and in here we are also using the recipe list view and ingredient list view, which we select by selecting items in the menu bar. So by using this, we switch between the items and we use the same pages which are just different inside of the page by using the onIdiom conditions. This way we are swapping the whole top level navigation. So on a phone we will use the phone navigation, on anything else, so on desktop or watch or tablet we will use the desktop navigation. Okay, so on top of this I was talking about replacing individual files. So if we have different views for desktop and different views for phone, we can do this by using shell. It's actually quite easy, because if you are using shell, you need to register the pages, you need to register the files that will be used as some routes. So what we have in here is something called a routing service. Let's take a look at how it's implemented. And in here we have routes defined for different pages. So for the common pages that are the same on phone and on desktop, we have the same files defined. So we will use recipe list view, ingredient list view, and settings view. On the other hand, if we want to create a completely different file, because there would be many conditions in the file and we don't want to share the same code for phone and desktop, we want to create different views, then we can create them. We just create different files where this is a file that will be used for desktop and this is the file that will be used for phone. And it's the same page, so it's the ingredient detail page and ingredient detail, but this one is for desktop and this one is for phone. There are no more onIdiom conditions in here because the files themselves are meant for a specific form factor or specific device type. But here in the routing service, we have it defined that these routes, so ingredients/edit, will give us this view, ingredient edit view phone, for our phone, if we have the idiom specified for phone. And on desktop we have the, where is it? Ingredients/edit. Oh, it's not defined in here. However, the detail is definitely defined in here, ingredients detail, and here ingredients detail is defined as the desktop side. So this way we can differentiate which file will be used on desktop and which file on phone, and we can create the views independently, don't share anything in them, or share some controls or some stuff, or styles and so on, but we don't need to use the onIdiom conditions inside of the XAML. So in this way, when we are launching our application, we just call this method, which is just a basic method that gets called after we build the application and we register the individual route. So we take the route from here and call register route. We specify the route and the type of the view that corresponds to that route. Then if we then use this in the navigation, they will be defined the way that we predefine them. So this is one way that we can easily replace files. The rest of the application doesn't need to know. They will just go to a specific route and the correct file, correct view will be resolved for desktop and for phone. All right, so this is the second thing. The first thing that we can take a look at is using custom build configurations. So this is a bit more advanced, but if you want to define stuff differently for phones and for desktops or for tablets or for other types of your application deployment, you can create your own build configurations. If you create different build configurations for different idioms, you can use the directory build props file, we will take a look at that, to share these settings among multiple projects. We'll see why this interests us in a little bit. And you can define some stuff inside of the directory build props file to make your life easier. You can define constants to use them in C# code, to use them as if conditions or the compiler conditions, and you can define an MS-build property for conditions in the CS project files. Let's take a look at how this behaves. So here we have a directory.build.props file, which will create our build configurations that have different settings for different idioms or different device types. If we create, if we run the build with debug.desktop configuration, we will get these things defined. So we will have a constant that says desktop, and we will have a configuration idiom which is called desktop. If we run the build with debug phone, on the other hand, we will get a phone constant and also the phone configuration idiom. How can this be used? If we take a look at some places, then we can see that we can deal with these a bit differently. So here is a routing service which is done a bit differently than the first one I was showing you. So the routing service is the place where we define which route corresponds to which view. And in the first one, we used the runtime condition device_info.idiom equals device_idiom.phone. So this will get resolved when the condition is met, so this will get resolved in the runtime. However, we don't always want to do that. We sometimes want to have it precompiled, and we don't want to deal with the hit of the performance when we are dealing with conditions in the runtime. So this way we can just create conditions that will replace the parts of the file, and as we have if Android or if iOS, we can define our own constants. So that's the stuff that's done here, define constants, desktop or phone. And we can use these in our code. So this part would be used if we switch it to phone configuration. Visual Studio is not that ready for this switching on the fly, but if I close the file and open it again, you can see that the syntax highlighting code up. So if you switch the build configuration, it might not show up immediately. Now it worked. But if you close the file and open it again, it should kick in. So this way we can create some conditions in the code. What's more, we can create conditions in the CS project files themselves. Let's take a look at one more thing and we will take a look inside of the CS project file. Another thing that is connected to this is the usage of logical names. If we take a look at logical names, then we can define different logical names for our files, which can be shared among different configurations or different platforms or different build types and so on. We can create our own logical names and use them in the code, or we can set the same logical name for different files for different conditions, and we can leverage this in our CS project files. Let's take a look at this. If I open the CS project file and I search for logical name, it will be used somewhere over here. Let's see here. So what we have is that we use a different placeholder image for our ingredients. So if the image for the ingredients is not defined and the size of the image is different on a phone and on a desktop, and we have different files defined for different form factors of the image, then we can say that, okay, for if the configuration idiom is desktop, which is defined in the directory build.props file, so this is set as desktop, then we want to include this MAUI image at this in this directory and this name, ingredient placeholder.desktop, and we want to include it with the logical name of ingredient_placeholder.jpg. But if the configuration idiom is set to phone, then we want to include a different file, but with the same logical name. Why is this important? Because if we define it this way, then we can, inside of the code, if we take a look at, for example, ingredient list view, and we take a look at the placeholder where it's used, we just specify that, okay, use this file as the placeholder, ingredient_placeholder.jpg. We don't need to put in any conditions, we don't need to do on idiom in here, we don't need to do any if else in here, we just specify that this is the file that is supposed to be used as the if the value is null, so if we need to fall back to a placeholder image. And we can do it just by specifying this in the CS project file. So if you have some way of defining this, you can use this for different purposes. You can use this if you want to replace any files. And for example, if you can use this even if the file doesn't change, but you want to use it on different platforms, because, for example, for images, different platforms handle the names and the paths to them differently. Some platforms want to specify the whole path, some platforms want to specify just the name of the image, and so on. So this way you can specify that, okay, for all platforms, this file will be available as this string. So now you can access it on Android and Windows and iOS the same way. So this can be useful even if we are not talking about different form factors or different device types, but if we are talking about just working with images. Okay, so this is another thing that can be useful, defining your own build configurations and using them in code and using them in CS project files. What else do we have in our store for developers? If you feel that you are creating a new application and you want to target a desktop and phone and tablet and other kinds of devices, you can think about this ahead of time and create separate class libraries. So this way you will just include the files that are actually needed for that platform, and you can keep them separated. You can build just those libraries for those device types, and you don't need to bundle in the code that is not used. Because if we take a look at our application right now, then we have desktop and phone views defined in the same library, in the same project. And now we could exclude and include them in the CS project file, but this is a bit more work and we need to write it ourselves. But if we just want to have, after compilation, the stuff that is used for this kind of platform or this kind of device, then we can move them to separate libraries. What we can do, or if you will be dealing with this, I would suggest you to use the same root namespace for the libraries and replace only the package reference based on configuration. This is easier to get done for new projects. If you already have an existing code base, it's quite difficult to move stuff around and to separate it into libraries and not share anything and stuff. So I would think about this if you have an existing code, but I would rather probably stick to separate build configurations and just moving stuff around inside of the project. And if you have that ready, then you can move it into separate libraries. But if you are starting a new project, I would definitely take a look at this approach. So let's take a look at how it's done in here, because we have this implementation inside of this project as well. So we have an alternative implementation to these recipe detail view desktop and ingredient detail view desktop and ingredient detail view phone classes or views. And we have something called component libraries. As I said, we want to have the same root namespace. So if we take a look at the properties of the project, we have the root namespace specified somewhere in there. When it loads, I can show you. Where is it? Let's see. Yeah, here. So this is the root namespace, and you can see that this is the common project. Sorry, so I need to open one of the specific projects because the common project is not doesn't have the same views. But in terms of the desktop and phone projects, if we take a look, then we have views and they are called exactly the same. So we have ingredient detail view and ingredient detail view in the same folder structure. So they will be in the same namespace. And if we define it this way, then we have the root namespace for the project is cookbook.app.components. So the actual view will be in the namespace of cookbook app components common view. Sorry, this is again the, no, it's not the common project. Okay, this is, oh no, this is namespace, sorry. I'm looking at the wrong line number. So cookbook app components views. The ingredient folder is omitted in here. This is done by using resharper and specifying that I don't care about this folder in the path of the namespace, which is my preference. You can use this or you don't need to use this. But if we take a look at this ingredient detail view inside of the phone project, then it has the same namespace. This will help us when we are referencing these libraries from the common project or from the app project, because there is the third routing service in here which takes advantage of this, which takes advantage of these separate libraries. And it just specifies that, okay, for recipe detail, we have different pages specified, but they are called the same, they are in the same namespace, so we just reference it as the recipe detail view. So we can see that suddenly the routes common part of the routing service got a bit bigger, because we can share multiple views in here, because they are called the same, they are not the actual same files. If we take a look at the recipe detail view for phone and recipe detail view for desktop, then you can directly see that these files are different, and they are basically the same files as those ones used in this kind of the structure. But in terms of routing and in terms of usage, if we are using some controls that are defined differently for different idioms or some services and so on, then we can very easily swap these. So how it's done in the application project is by referencing it. Let's see here. So again, we are using the configuration idiom, and for desktop, we are referencing this project. For phone, we are referencing another project. So if we switch the configurations, the different files will be automatically used, and only the files that are defined in this project will be included in the final build. So we will not include those views which are not used for our device type. This way, you can put anything in these libraries that you want, and it will be separated for phone and separated for desktop. Just beware that if you are building only for one of the configurations and you are building only the app project, then only that path with the build configuration will be included. So if I build app right now, the desktop will be built, but not the phone components. But you can always build the whole solution, or you can run multiple builds in your pipelines and so on, just to check for build errors. So this way we can differentiate different views and put them in separate libraries. You can deal this way also with different images, different services, and so on. So what else can we do? In terms of customization, we always deal with, or you can encounter dealing with customized controls. You've probably already heard of custom handlers. So I will not talk much about custom handlers in this talk. There is already a talk in MAUIUIJULY about custom handlers and how they work, how you can make them and how you can put them in different folders and name them differently just to get what you want from the custom handlers. But there are also different ways of customizing your controls. So I would like to take a look at that. There is a way where you can prepend, modify, or append handlers to an existing control type. So you can this way extend how buttons work and what happens if a handler gets attached to a button or modifies and so on. And what I want to look at is customizing existing controls and creating your own versions of those controls and using them in code. So let's take a look at this. We have a control in here which is done in this way, and it's called a button with confirmation. First of all, we can take a look at how this works. It's used in the ingredient detail view, and it's used for deleting our ingredients. I don't want to delete the ingredient, but I want to show you what happens with this control. So this is a special kind of button, and if I click it, I don't immediately get the action, so I don't run the deletion of the ingredient, but I will get a prompt that will ask me if I really want to do this action. So this is something that can be different on every single platform. On desktop, there is a nice thing in Windows App SDK called Flyout, which can be attached, oh, no, I clicked the wrong button, which can be attached to the button and it will show up directly above the control. You can create the contents of it on your own, you can specify whatever needs to be done in there, and so there is some text and a delete button which would actually delete the ingredient if I clicked it. On Android, we don't have such a thing, but we have some dialogues, so we can create a system dialog and show the messages and show a cancel button and a delete button. So in this way, we can handle this kind of an action. Let's take a look at how it's done. So in here, this is a control that is not specific for desktop or for mobile, but for phone, but this is something directly provided for a specific platform. So I have this in the common project. I could move the implementations themselves to desktop or to phone and have it just Windows and Mac implementation in here and iOS and Android implementation in here. But you can move this stuff around however you want. What we have in here is something that is common for all the platforms, which is the control itself. And it's defined as a control that derives from the button. So this is just a MAUI controls button, control, standard button. So it will have all the stuff that comes with button. We don't need to specify it on our own, as when we are using custom handlers and we need to deal with a bunch of stuff. This way, we'll just use an existing control and put some logic on top of it. So what this common code does is it only provides us with a couple of bindable properties to get in the text that will be used for the messages and for text inside of the buttons in the control. And we have partial methods called change handler and changing handler, which will be implemented for the specific platforms. So this way we can override some stuff that happens, or we can create some parts of the control. Let's take a look at the Windows implementation first. So here in the platforms folder, we have the Windows folder, and here we have the control itself. You can see that it has the same name and it has the same namespace. So this is a partial class, which is another part of this class. So namespace is the same. And in here we have the implementation. So when the changed handler, or the event is called handler changed, gets called, we want to create the flyout. This is when the control is created. We want to do the stuff that needs to be shown when the actual button will be clicked. So what we do is that we create the flyout itself. So there's a control that will be displayed when we click the button. And we create some kind of a content inside of the control. We have some methods that will help us with creating the individual controls in there. And we also move the command that gets passed to this control inside of this so that it is bound to the exit button. So when we click the actual delete button, nothing happens. But when we click the delete button, we will get the command in there so that we can use it just as a regular button anywhere in the code and pass a command inside of it. This way, so when we pass the command into the underlying control, so into the exe button, then we don't want to execute the actual command when we click the button. So this way we disable, or well, we set the command to null so that nothing happens when we nothing happens. Well, the stuff that happens is that the flyout will be displayed. So that's what we need to do in order to get this working. Inside of the changing handler, we have nothing, because in this type of control we don't need this. This will be called anytime that something changes, and we can this will be called also when the control is disposed, or well, when it's disabled from the page. And in here we could do some logic when that happens. We will see that in the Android implementation. So let's take a look at the Android implementation. And in here, the stuff behaves a bit differently. We don't create a flyout in here, but we hook an event handler to the clicked event that will be called when the button is pressed. And we again disable the original command. We move it to some internal or some private field so that we can use it later when the user actually clicks the exe button. Inside of the button clicked handler or method, we will display an alert. So this is just regular code for displaying alert, and we will pass in the texts that were passed to our control. And when the user says that they want to click the exe button, then we will actually call the pop-up command, which we saved in here. Moreover, when we are dealing with events, we also want to unregister the event so that when the control is out of scope, we don't call it anymore, and it's ready for disposing the control. So in here, we actually want to deal with the changing handler method, and we just check if this is, because this will be called also when the control is initialized and also when it's disposed. So this way we can say that, okay, if the control is new, we don't want to do anything. But if this event is that, okay, this is being disposed, then we want to remove the event handler. So this way it should be clean. Okay, so this way we can use our button. If we take a look at the screen where it's used, ingredient detail view, and we can take a look at the desktop where the button with confirmation is used. You can see that this is just a regular button, so we can use styles that we have defined for buttons, and we can just set the command, we can set the text, we can set the corner radius. So these are attributes that the usual button has. But on top of this, we specify the texts, and that's for the pop-up or the flyout or the alert will be displayed, so they can be used inside of it, and they can be used for the buttons as well. So this way, we can just use this in part of the normal button, and the same goes for the phone implementation. So if we take a look at, where am I? Desktop, and here is the phone implementation, and here is again the same control with the same interface, the same names of the bindable properties and so on. And this is interchangeable, so we can use it for phone and for desktop. However, you should also implement this for iOS and Mac so that something happens on other platforms as well. These were just two samples to show it on Windows and on Android. Right, so This way you can easily create custom controls that will derive from existing controls and can use everything that the controls themselves provide, but on top of it, you can create your own functionality easily. Okay, so when we deal with the platform-specific stuff, we can organize the files in different ways. We can organize them so that we have suffixes in terms of the platforms. We could create it this way, that there would be a file called buttonwithconfirmation.android.cs and buttonwithconfirmation.windows.cs, or we can put them in the platform folders. I believe the first thing that was provided for MAUIUIJULY was a blog post directly done about this. So if you are interested in platform-specific folders and in custom handlers, then definitely take a look at that. Right, so if we take a look at what we talked about on idiom and device info.idiom, which can be used to differentiate your UI inside of XAML files or inside of your C# code. And this way you can do some minor modifications of your UI, or you can replace individual files. Then you can create your own build configurations to achieve better performance, better application size, because you can omit some files from your build. You can create platform folders and platform suffixes to deal with custom handlers and customizing your controls. You can move stuff around to custom libraries. As I said, this is mostly done or mostly appreciated in new projects. In existing projects, this can be a bit more work. But if you use this in combination with the build configurations, then you can achieve really nice code structure and omitting of stuff that is not needed for your own devices, or if you do some class libraries for desktop and some class libraries for phone, you will just get those files that are needed for the specific scenario. And of course, you can create the custom handlers or custom controls if you don't find these other tips as enough. Then you can create your own controls and do whatever you want for those specific platforms. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you're interested in MAUI, I would definitely suggest you to check out the recordings from a conference that we've done quite recently in March. And we had these 4 wonderful people there. I was also speaking there. And there is a bunch of content, and you can find the recordings on the site that is linked in the slides. Also, if you are interested in .NET development in general, definitely check out the Update conference, which is a quite large conference hosted every year in November in Prague. If you are from the area or you want to visit the heart of Europe, then definitely come and take a look at what we have in offer. We already have some speakers announced for it. We are working on the schedule right now, so definitely check out the sites and you will see the details very soon. Thank you very much again, and hope you enjoy the rest of the content for MAUIUIJULY. Goodbye. Roman out.